Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cast and Spear podcast. My name is John, and today we have back on the show Anthony Esposito. You can find him on Instagram at Black Flag Fishing. Today we're going to cover all things kayak fishing safety, everything you need to know to be safe on the water. Anthony, welcome back to the show.
Hey John, good to be here.
Great. I want to jump right in. Can we chat a little bit about equipment?
Yes, absolutely. So, in the previous two episodes, we kind of talked about getting ready, getting set with your fundamentals, maybe looking at a kayak you want to buy. Here's a few things to consider. When you buy a kayak, that is not the only point of investment for your adventures to come. You need to be safe out there. So the biggest thing, obviously, is going to be a PFD. You're probably looking at anywhere from $100 to $200. It's something that is, at least for me, I believe it's non-negotiable. If you show up to kayak with me and you don't have a PFD, I usually have a spare in my truck. If you don't want to put it on, cool, you can go find somebody else to be your kayaking buddy. As far as where to get them, you can usually find them at outdoor stores, kayak shops, Amazon. I mean, there's really no excuse to not have a PFD.
And
it's
for
something that
and,
is.
And for those who don't know, PFD is a personal flotation device, just in case you've never heard that term.
Forgive me, all the technical jargon. PFD, personal flotation device, super important. It's a life vest, life jacket. It's something that you absolutely need to have. Next, one of the items that I think is critical to have on the water is a radio. Not everybody has one. I know that I've got a couple of buddies who, theirs fell over and it was a couple trips before they went out and bought another one. Personally, for me, I don't leave without it. I keep it in my truck. I have it clipped onto my life vest, and I keep the life vest in the truck. I have the charger in the truck. It plugs into the cigarette lighter, and when I'm on the way to the launch, I plug it in just to make sure that the battery's topped off when I'm out on the water. There's some stuff to know about radios. You want to make sure you get the right kind. You're going to be looking for a marine VHF radio. I'm not an expert in radio technology. You'll have to do a little bit more research on your end, but typically if you go to a kayak shop or if you look at really most of the outdoor stores, they're going to have a marine VHF radio that's going to be, you want it to be waterproof because you're going to get wet. The radio is going to get wet. It could be, it should be floating. It's probably going to fall in the water at some point. If it's not floating, make sure it's lashed onto you. Some of them have a GPS. Almost all of them come preset with the safety channels, National Ocean Agency channel with the weather and all that. It's something that is, again, to me, I think that it's borderline non-negotiable for me. If I go out with buddies, I very much prefer for them to have a radio. And it's not just for safety. It also helps you to have a good time, because if you hook up on a fish and you're 200 or 300 yards away from your buddy, you want to share the stoke. You get on the radio and you call him up and you say, hey, I got one over here. And he runs over there to take a video or take some pictures, help you land the fish, get his line in the water over there. It's just a huge benefit to have one. It's about $100, $150, not a giant investment. And it's something that could save your life. Go ahead.
Yeah, before we get into the next topic, I totally agree with the radio. I need to buy one of those. But going back to the PFD, do you know what class yours is? Is yours a class 1, 2, 3?
I believe it's a class 3.
Class 3.
And the exact one that I use is an NRS Chinook. And there's multiple types of PFDs. If you want to go back to that for just a minute, there's multiple types of PFDs. You want something that is going to fit you and be comfortable so that you wear it. A lot of the kayaking PFDs have like a cutout in the back below so I would say about, for those who are like anatomically sound, right below your scapula is where the pad cuts off, so that when you're sitting in the kayak and you have a seat behind you, it's not pushing you forward. So there's like a relief there so that you can lean back and be comfortable. You can paddle, you can pedal if you're pedaling. Some of them have pockets. That's personal preference. I like the pockets because I like to keep my phone in my PFD pocket. I don't like it out. I don't like it in my shorts. Typically, I wear shorts when I'm out. I like that it has a zipper and not just straps, so I can unzip it if I need to, zip it back up. Sometimes you're out there, you have a jacket or something underneath it, like a paddling jacket. You want to take that off as it gets hot. It's real easy to just unzip, pull that thing off, put the PFD back on. There's some that are inflatable. You don't feel them when you're wearing them. They're real light, almost like a t-shirt. And then they've got, or, I'd say they're, I guess if I were to describe it more accurately, it's like having a harness on, but the harness is not super tight. It's not hugging you. You're not like a roller coaster harness. It's more like you've just got a loose padded harness on, and it's got a canister in it that is, in theory, it deploys automatically when it hits the water. Whether or not it does, you can do some research for yourself. Personally, I prefer something that just floats automatically. It's just filled with foam, old fashioned. You don't have to worry about your canister, recharging it, expirations, anything like that.
Now, do you also, in addition to your radio and PFD, have one of those GPS locators, or do you not have that?
I do. I have so the one that I have is a satellite communicator with a PLB. PLB, I'm not going to mess this up again. PLB stands for Personal Locator Beacon. I'm trying to get away from the acronyms here. So the Personal Locator Beacon is essentially what it is if you get lost or you need some help, it gets dark, you can't find your way back to shore, you need to call for help. It's a big ocean. You're not just going to point and say, oh, I'm somewhere off the land to the west. They're going to be looking for, a flea in the sand. So what this does is it essentially pinpoints you within a set distance, which I believe typically is about 3 meters. That's usually enough for them to find you. If they can't find you in 3 meters, you might be underwater at that point. Hopefully not. But it's generally, they work anywhere in the world, anywhere that you can see the sky, they typically work. Someone will work on a private network. The one that I have is a Garmin. It's a Garmin InReach, and it works through a private network. I believe the network's called GLONASS, which is owned and operated by Garmin. Some of them go directly to the authorities. That's more like a traditional PLB that doesn't have the satellite communicator function. With the Garmin style, and I'm just using that term as a general one, there's a bunch of companies that make them. With the Garmin style, the satellite communicator style, there's an upfront cost of the unit, and then there's also a subscription fee. I pay every month. I think it's like $15, not that expensive. I can broadcast my location without being in emergency mode. I can broadcast my location to my wife. If I'm with a buddy and he's trying to meet up with me, I can share it with him. It's real easy. It's like a text message. You can link it to your phone. And if, for lack of a better term, if shit hits the fan, you lose your paddle or your drive breaks, you're way out, you're blown offshore, you can activate the SOS feature. It will send a signal to GLONASS. GLONASS will send a signal to, I believe, the Coast Guard or whatever governing agency that would be the first responder in your circumstance. If you're in the mountains, it might be somebody else. But for me, typically, it's going to be the Coast Guard. They're going to shoot a boat out there to your location, scoop you up, and you're going to make it home.
I need to get one of those for Baja when we get lost.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, now we have all the preliminary safety gear. We're getting out on the water. Is there anything we need to be careful of about, sea lions or animals, or, just keeping our eyes open?
So there's a couple other things before we get that far. I want to make sure that everybody has some form of first aid. You want to have something to stop bleeding. If you hook yourself bad, if you get a hook on the inside of your arm and it won't stop bleeding, you want something that you can put pressure on it with. You want bandages, all the standard stuff. A big one for guys that I don't know that it comes in a first aid kit, but just go to the store and buy it. Dramamine. Put Dramamine on your kayak, because if you're out there and you're tying knots and the swells are coming and you are miserable, but you don't want to leave your buddy out there because you guys have been planning this trip for a month, get some Dramamine on your kayak. Believe me, it'll save your day. A compass is something you want to have, whether it's typically I prefer a magnetic compass. I have one that I got on Amazon. I just wear it on my on a bracelet on my wrist. Do be careful, because if you have a metal buckle on that bracelet, it'll throw off the GPS. It'll throw off the compass's magnetism. So you've got to unclip it to make sure that it's pointing north. That's something to be aware of. You might look at it and think it's broken. It's probably just got the buckle that it's interacting with. a GPS. If you have a fish finder, most of them have a GPS. If they don't have the GPS that has the actual maps and it's just a white screen, like I think the Lowrance Hook X, for instance, doesn't have any mapping software. It just has a white screen. Turn on your breadcrumb trail so that you can, if you leave in the morning and the fog rolls in and you can't see land, you can at least follow your trail back to land. You want to have some cordage on board, whether it be paracord, bungee cords, something like that. If you need to tie something off, if you need to dock your kayak somewhere that doesn't have a real landing, you might want to tie it to a dock. You might want to tie it to a buoy, even if you're just out there floating around and you just want to anchor up to something so you can stay on top of the fish. You know what I mean? Have something that you can tie off with. And then water. And I've made this mistake before. I'm sure that one of my buddies is probably going to listen to this and he's going to give me a bunch of shit for it because we went out and we had a long day. I think we launched at 5. And by the time it was 2:00, I was parched. I didn't have any water. I forgot my canteen in the truck. And I was sharing water with him and he was gracious enough to give me some. But, he rode me pretty hard about that for a while. Every time we go out, he asks, "You got your water today?" So, and there's no excuse. So I knew that I had forgot it when we launched, but I didn't want to walk back up to the truck and get it. And it was foolish on my part. And you don't go out without water. Now, if you want to move on to procedures.
Oh, no. Well, first off, you just jogged my memory, and thanks for doing that. I just recorded a video on how to put on a tourniquet. One of my buddies is the head ER doctor here at LA County, and he showed how to put on the CATS one, because for spear fishermen, if we shoot each other or whatnot, there's certain things to consider. So I'll put that link to the video in the show notes in case you guys have never seen, how to put on a tourniquet properly. And then another thing about the Dramamine, they make a non-drowsy version. I highly recommend that one over the original. I took 2 tablets yesterday because I went to San Clemente Island on a boat, and I was like, I usually don't get seasick. I usually don't need medication, but I've been seasick before, and it's the worst feeling in the absolute world. But one thing to do is make sure if you do have kind of like a high stakes, it's going to be a while before you get to shore, take it like hours before you leave, just so that, because if you start feeling sick, it's a kind of a high probability that you won't really feel the benefits necessarily. If you take it like, oh, I'm already feeling sick, and you try to get it down, it works a little bit better if you take it either the night before or like the morning of, before you start feeling queasy. But yeah, man,
take it as a precaution.
Yeah, it almost makes, why even leave it to chance? It could be just like putting your head down while you're grabbing your rods, that throws your equilibrium off, and then you're screwed. So it's like, why chance it? All right, what do you want to chat about next in terms of, after you got all the safety gear, what do we need to be thinking about?
Okay, so you want to know how to use this stuff. So when you get your gear, you get your PFD, size it up, make sure it's snug, you get your radio, read the manual. Even if you just go on YouTube and YouTube review of that radio or some kind of a tutorial, there's going to be information out there. That stuff's not there just to take up space on a server somewhere. Utilize that information and the resources that are available to us today. Look at that stuff. Figure out how to use your gear, get comfortable with it, because the time to figure out how to use it is not when you're trying to figure out how to stay alive or how to stay on top of your kayak. There's a lot of other stuff going on. If it becomes comfortable to you, it'll just make your life so much easier in an emergency. Let somebody know where you're going. Make sure that now I get it. You're on the water. There's not a bunch of landmarks out there. But give them a general idea. I typically, when I park, I take a screenshot of my location on Google Maps. I send it to my wife so that she knows where my truck is. She knows, okay, he launched from here. He's not going to be far. Even if you launch, and this is completely hypothetical, even if you were to launch at somewhere like La Jolla and the wind turned up bad and you had to go down to San Diego Bay or Mission Bay and land your kayak, at least somebody's going to know that you're in that vicinity. They're not going to be looking for you in Malibu when you're in San Diego. I think that's important. I know guys who just go out, a lot of guys, I get it. Not everybody's married. Not everybody has somebody who's local to look out for them. Hey, we got cell phones. We got the internet. Just shoot a message to somebody who It doesn't even have to be local. That if you don't get in touch with them in a certain amount of time, and I'm not saying you got to say, hey, if you don't hear from me in 24 hours, something bad happened. No, but if you talk to somebody every day and then they all of a sudden don't hear from you, they're going to be wondering what's going on, and they're going to have some information about where you might be. That's something to consider. That kind of brings me to the next thing I want to cover, which is try and go out with a buddy. I know there's a lot of guys who get into kayaking and they feel pretty comfortable and they go out by themselves, and that's cool. I get it. You can't always get a buddy to go. Sometimes you end up out there by yourself. You have all the safety equipment. So if something bad does happen, you can hopefully take care of yourself. But having a buddy doesn't hurt, and it usually makes it more fun, and it just makes it 100 times safer. Your PFD, again, going back to this real quick, and I'm going to kind of harp on this as we go through this episode. Make sure it's on. It doesn't do you any good if it's underneath the ties in your tank well, or if it's in your hole, or if it's strapped to the bow. It does you absolutely no good. If you get separated from the kayak and the kayak drifts off and you don't have the PFD, you're going to be in a pretty rough situation. Another thing to consider when you're out there, I know that the first thing I mention to people when they want to learn about kayak fishing, the first question everybody gets, I'm sure everybody listening to this who's been on a kayak is going to test this. People want to know about sharks. I'm here to tell you right now, sharks are not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is your weekend warrior boater who just killed the 6-pack and he's on his way back into the harbor. All right. The guy's going full throttle, sending it into the harbor, and he's throwing a wake that's 4 feet tall. That's the guy you need to watch out for. All right. Be aware of boaters, be aware of jet skis, sea-doos, whatever you want to call them. Any kind of personal watercraft that is motorized can potentially cause you a bunch of problems.
Do you combat that by being very bright? Like, do you wear neon stuff or?
So I like to try and hedge my bets in my favor. I have an orange kayak. I have an orange PFD. I have a paddle that's got a blue stripe on it. I sometimes will wave the paddle around. I have a flag on the kayak. That's one of the items I should have mentioned in the safety equipment section. You want to have a flag. But even then, you're so low to the water that if you're between swells and somebody's coming in, their bows up because they're on it full throttle, they're not going to see you. So you need to be aware. Don't count on them. Even though you have the right of way, don't count on them to be paying attention. You know what I mean? It's like when you're driving. You might have the right of way, but if somebody's on their phone or something like else, on the phone, messing with the radio, looking at the kids in the back seat, it's the same thing on the water. You know what I mean? Pay attention because you can't rely on anybody else. You are your first line of defense.
So basically, kayakers are the motorcyclists of the ocean.
Yeah,
always be defensive.
Kayakers are exactly. Always be defensive. And just because you have the right of way, which you do in a kayak, you're in the ocean. The way it goes is swimmers have the right of way over manual propulsion, which would include kayaks, paddle boards, stuff like that. Kayaks and swimmers have the right of way over wind propulsion, which would be your sailboats. And all motor vehicles have to yield to those others, right? That's the way it works in theory. But just be smart, get out of the way. If you look like you are on a path to collide with somebody, if you keep going, just stop and let them pass. The fish they're not swimming that fast. You know what I mean? If you're running to a boil in your kayak and somebody's running there in their Parker, guess who's going to win? You know what I mean? Don't get in the way. Try to avoid any kind of, just don't be too close to them because you might get ran over.
All right, moving on. What is this term that I've heard before? Test biting.
Okay. So, everybody who's been in kayaking for a little while might remember that last year there was a whale in La Jolla, a dead whale in La Jolla. And we were getting messages over the radio saying not to go near it. And the reason you don't go near it when there's a dead mammal or any other kind of dead object in the water that might attract fish there are sharks in the water. From what I understand, they will test bite anything that's in the water near that feeding frenzy because they don't know what's food and what's not when there's something like that going on until they bite it. So if you were over there in your kayak, you might look like another mammal that's floating on the surface, something that they may decide they want to sample. So, just don't put yourself in that scenario. Keep your eyes open, again, for anything that's dead. I know sometimes you see half-eaten seals out there, or sea lions, I guess they would be. Half time you see sea lions, dead birds, stuff like that. just avoid them. I know they're interesting. Believe me, I know they're interesting. You want to get up right on them and like inspect them, but you're really putting yourself near something that is absolutely on the menu for a predator. And just, try to avoid that situation, as intriguing as it may be.
So does that mean you don't chase birds or anything? Like when you see the boil, do you try to keep situational awareness, or what do you do in that situation? How do you stay focused?
So you do chase birds. Yeah, you absolutely chase birds. I mean, it's just like any other type of fishing where you're going to try and orient yourself where the fish are, and that's where the fish are. And typically, if you're chasing a boil, that's because there's smaller bait fish, not a big giant whale. You know what I mean? You don't look like a sardine when you're on a kayak. You don't look like the fish that are being targeted in that boil. Typically, you'll have so from my understanding, I'm not a biologist. From my understanding, what generally creates a boil is you have maybe some phytoplankton or smaller baits for the little fin baits. So we're talking about, tiny little shrimps or something that are causing the smaller baits to orient there. And then those smaller baits are feeding, and they are attracting larger fish, like our game fish, whether it be yellowtail or bass or whatever it is. They're going to come and they're going to kind of, for lack of a better term, herd those bait fish into a ball. And those bait fish are going to try and run from those larger fish. And when they do that, they're going to end up going towards the surface. Once they get to the surface, they can't go any higher. And so you get what is called the boil, where you see the fish kind of breaking on the surface. So it's kind of a feeding frenzy, but it's not a feeding frenzy where there's just a big dead mammal giving off all kinds of nasty oils and blood and stuff that's attracting other sharks and stuff like that. That's going to feed on a dead animal. You know what I mean? It's going to be mostly fin fish.
Perfect. A few more things before we end this episode. What are your thoughts on, do you always carry a paddle even if you have the pedal drive?
Yes, absolutely. Carry a paddle. As I mentioned in a previous episode, I had my Mirage drive broke on me. I had a paddle with me. I was able to get back to shore. It wasn't a big deal. I've been out with buddies and they've had their drives fail, and whether it broke, it got something caught in it. Maybe they lost it. Sometimes you'll lose your drive. The last thing you want to do is flip maybe 2 miles offshore and your drive is lost, and now you can't get back to shore because you don't have one. You didn't have it tied in. You got to call your buddy on your radio that you don't have. You got to have this stuff. If you buy, I will say, man, here's another attaboy, I guess, for Hobie. If you buy a Hobie, even though it's a pedal drive kayak, they're going to give you a paddle with it. That's nice. If you buy new, you'll get a paddle with it. Most of the time when you buy a kayak, they don't come with a paddle. So that is a big benefit. I'm not going to say it's a great paddle. If you ever paddled with a decent paddle, you'll immediately know that. But it's something that's going to move you through the water and get you back to shore, which is, at the end of the day, that's where you want to be.
Now, I know a lot of guys fish generally go where the structure is, and a big piece of structure that kayakers are able to get to are the jetties. How close do you get to the rocks so that you're not in danger?
Okay, so there's two things to address here. There's a large piece of man-made structure, like a jetty and a pier and stuff like that. And typically, if you are on the inside of the jetty, you got to stay away from the boats, but try and stay far enough off those rocks that you're not going to bang into them or wash into them. There's usually fishermen on the jetty that are going to be a pretty good indication of where your distance should be, because if you're crossing their lines, you're too close. That's A, it's just bad etiquette. B, it could be unsafe. You don't want to be right in the middle of the inlet because, again, there's boats coming in and out. You don't want to be in the way. You're on a kayak. You can't move that fast. As fast as you think you're going at, 4 or 5 knots, the boat that's just trolling to get back in is passing you, and you don't want to be in his way. On the outside, it's a little bit different. On the outside, you have a current that's moving towards that jetty, typically in one or two directions. And it's going to create some reverberation. For anybody who's ever fished out of like Redondo, you're going to know that on the outside of that jetty, it could be madness out there. You could have whitewater from the jetty 100 yards back because there's such a strong current and swell that's crashing into that jetty. You need to be mindful of your orientation of the kayak in in that instance. Generally, when you're going into big swells or waves or anything like that, you want the bow going into them. It's easy if you're fishing, especially if you're structure fishing, because you're trying to stay on top of the fish. It's easy to get turned sideways, and then you end up getting overturned by a wave. You just want to make sure that above all else, you are keeping your distance far enough away that you're not in the, I guess you would call it like the strong rebound, or I don't know what the word would be. The strong, when the waves hit the jetty and they're bouncing back at you at full force, don't be in that water. Don't be in that water. That goes for boiler rocks. That goes for jetties. That goes for cliff faces. Anywhere where the water is hitting and causing a reverberation and the waves are coming back the other direction and it's causing super turbulent white water, try and stay away from that if you're in a kayak.
Dude, that's huge. And to wrap it up, I think you told me a while back you have a best 2 of 3 rule. What is that, so people can implement it?
So I don't want to take credit for this. It's something I read on NorCal Kayak Anglers Forum a while back. Somebody else posted it. I wish I could find the post and give him credit because I think it's great. So there are 3 things that are ideal to have and 2 of them that are necessary. The first would be good weather. The second would be a buddy. And the third would be an intimate knowledge of where you're going to be fishing. If you have all 3, that's the ideal day. If you have 2 of those, that's a relatively safe day. If you just have 1 of those, you really shouldn't be out there by yourself. If you have poor weather, you're by yourself, even though you know the location and the fishery pretty well, you're still putting yourself at a massive amount of risk by being out there by yourself in inclement weather.
Dude, that's huge. Well, I know this episode a little bit longer than all of them, but that's because we really value safety. Everything, we don't talk about safety enough, I feel, in not just kayak fishing, but in all kind of crazy activities that guys do. So this is just to be a primer. I know there's a lot of other things we could have covered, but Anthony, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this. I hope it saves some of you guys from getting in some sticky situations so that you can just keep fishing and not have anybody be scared for you, or you feel scared yourself. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
thank you for having me.
Perfect. If you want to reach out to Anthony, be sure to check the show notes. I'll have links to his information. And until next time, stay safe out there, and I'll see you on the water. Hey, one more thing before you go. Do you find yourself watching YouTube as much as I do? I think it's replaced my TV, to be honest. Well, if so, check out the Cast and Spear YouTube channel. We're trying to put up good tips and tricks that we learn as we get better at fishing and spearfishing. And we'd love for you to subscribe and leave a comment. We'll see you there. Bye.